The sun hung high in the sky, casting golden rays over the quiet suburban streets of Oak Ridge Heights, Indiana. It was one of those perfect summer days, the kind where the air smelled like freshly cut grass, and the occasional breeze carried the laughter of children playing outside. The neighborhood was peaceful, with its rows of modest houses, neatly trimmed lawns, and friendly neighbors who waved at each other as they passed by. At the edge of one such house, right under the shade of a towering oak tree, stood 11-year-old Kiera Daniels. Her small hands gripped the sides of her makeshift lemonade stand, a wooden table covered with a bright yellow cloth. Perched proudly at the front was a hand-painted sign, crafted with care the night before. It read in bold, colorful letters, "Kiera's famous lemonade, 50 cents a cup." Tiny hearts and lemons decorated the edges, making the sign as cheerful as the girl who had made it. Kiera had been up since dawn, determined to make this day a success. With sleeves rolled up and her curly hair tied back into a ponytail, she had spent the morning squeezing lemons, measuring sugar, and stirring her secret recipe to perfection. Every drop of lemonade in the large glass pitcher was a product of her hard work, her hands slightly sticky from all the juice and sugar. Her mother, Tasha, had watched over her from the kitchen window, stepping in only when necessary. But this wasn't Tasha's project, it was Kiera's. She wanted to do it all on her own, and there was a reason for that. Kiera wasn't just selling lemonade for fun. She had a goal, a dream that made her heart race with excitement every time she thought about it. The school was planning a special trip to the Indianapolis Zoo, and she needed $50 to cover the cost. It wasn't a fortune, but for an 11-year-old, it might as well have been. Her mother had offered to help, but Kiera wanted to earn the money herself. She wanted to prove that she could work hard and make something happen with her own two hands. As she carefully arranged the cups, the tip jar, and the extra lemons for display, she took a deep breath, steadying herself. The street was quiet for now, but soon people would come. And when they did, she would be ready. With a bright smile on her face, she straightened her shoulders, looked down the street, and waited for her first customer. Today was going to be her day. Kiera's dream wasn't extravagant. She didn't want a fancy new toy or the latest trendy sneakers. All she wanted was to go on the school's upcoming field trip to the Indianapolis Zoo. It was all her classmates could talk about, how they would see lions up close, watch the dolphins do tricks, and even feed the giraffes. Kiera had never been to a zoo before, and the thought of missing out made her stomach twist. The trip cost $50, a sum that felt daunting to an 11-year-old. Her mother had assured her that they would find a way, but Kiera was determined to earn it herself. She wanted to prove that she could do it, that she could set a goal, work hard, and make it happen. So here she was, standing behind her little lemonade stand, ready to turn her dream into reality, one cup at a time. The morning had been slow at first, with only a few cars rolling by. Kiera waved at every single one, flashing her biggest, most inviting smile, but no one stopped. Doubt started to creep in. What if no one came? What if all her hard work had been for nothing? Then, the front door of the house next door creaked open, and out stepped Mrs. Andrews, Kiera's elderly neighbor. She was a kind woman, always tending to her garden or offering fresh-baked cookies to the neighborhood kids. With her white curls tucked neatly under a sun hat, she made her way toward Kiera's stand, purse in hand. Well, look at you," Mrs. Andrews said, her voice warm as honey. "Selling lemonade on a hot day. Now that's smart." Kiera grinned, gripping the handle of her pitcher. "Would you like to try some, Mrs. Andrews? It's only 50 cents a cup." Mrs. Andrews chuckled and pulled 2 quarters from her pocket, placing them gently into the tip jar. "Make mine extra cold, sweetheart." Kiera carefully poured the golden liquid into a paper cup, watching as the ice cubes clinked together. Mrs. Andrews took a sip and let out an exaggerated sigh of satisfaction. "Oh my, this might just be the best lemonade in all of Indiana," she declared. Kiera's chest swelled with pride. "Really? I'd bet my hydrangeas on it." Mrs. Andrews winked before taking another sip. "You're going to sell out in no time, dear." The word sent a thrill through Kiera. Maybe she really could do this. As the morning turned to afternoon, more people started to take notice. A car slowed down as it passed, and the driver gave a friendly honk before rolling down the window. "Hey, little lady, how much for a cup?" Kiera perked up. 50 cents, sir." The man grinned, fishing into his pocket. "I'll take 2. With each customer, Kiera's confidence grew. Her tip jar started filling with small bills and shiny coins, and she felt a spark of excitement every time she dropped money inside. She wasn't just selling lemonade. She was getting closer to her dream. Across the street, a group of neighborhood kids were playing basketball in a driveway. The rhythmic sound of the ball bouncing against the pavement filled the air. Kiera noticed one of the boys, a kid about her age, steal a glance in her direction. He hesitated for a moment before jogging over, brushing sweat from his forehead. "I'll take 2, he said, flashing a crooked grin as he handed her a dollar bill. Kiera beamed. "Coming right up." She poured the lemonade carefully, feeling more and more like a real business owner with every transaction. By early afternoon, her notebook, where she had been keeping track of her sales, showed that she had already made $15. She was well on her way to reaching her goal. As she looked at the growing number of customers and the clinking coins in her jar, Kiera couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. She was doing it. She was making this happen. And little did she know, the most unexpected customers of the day were just around the corner. The afternoon sun hung high, casting a warm golden glow over the quiet neighborhood. The rhythmic sounds of bouncing basketballs, the occasional hum of a passing car, and the cheerful chatter of customers at Kiera's lemonade stand filled the air. It was turning out to be a great day. She had already made more money than she expected, and if things continued like this, she'd reach her goal in no time. Then, something changed. At first, it was just a faint sound, a low vibration in the distance. Kiera barely noticed it, too busy pouring lemonade into cups and counting her growing earnings. But within seconds, the sound grew louder, deeper, more intense. The steady hum turned into a powerful rumble, like a distant storm rolling toward the neighborhood. Kiera paused, her hand tightening around the pitcher. The bouncing of the basketball stopped. A dog across the street perked up, ears twitching. Then, from around the corner, they appeared. 8 massive motorcycles roared down the street, their chrome bodies glinting under the afternoon sun. They moved together in perfect formation, engines growling like thunder, leather-clad riders gripping the handlebars with ease. Their black helmets and jackets made them look imposing, mysterious figures cutting through the peaceful neighborhood like something out of a movie. Kiera's breath caught in her throat. The motorcycles rolled closer, closer, until, to her absolute shock, they stopped, right in front of her stand. One by one, the engines cut off, leaving behind a heavy silence that pressed against the street like a held breath. The group of kids who had been playing basketball stood frozen, staring in wide-eyed wonder. Even Mrs. Andrews, who had been sitting comfortably on her porch, peered through the curtains, her face barely visible behind the glass. Kiera swallowed hard. Her fingers clenched the edge of the lemonade stand as she stared at the bikers, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure they could hear it. One of the riders, the biggest of the group, swung his leg off his motorcycle. His boots hit the pavement with a heavy thud as he straightened to his full height. His jacket was covered in patches Kiera couldn't read, and his beard was thick and gray, giving him the look of someone who had seen many roads, many miles, and many stories. With slow, deliberate movements, he reached up and removed his helmet. The man beneath was weathered but not unkind. Deep lines carved into his face, his eyes sharp yet unreadable. He studied Kiera for a long moment, the silence stretching between them. Then, in a voice as deep and rumbling as his motorcycle, he spoke. "This is where I can get the best lemonade in town." Kiera blinked. Her throat felt dry, her mind racing, but somehow she managed a shaky nod. "Yes, sir," she stammered, gripping the pitcher. 50 cents a cup. The biker's lips twitched, and then, to her utter surprise, he chuckled. 50 cents, huh? He reached into his pocket, pulling out a crumpled dollar bill. "Then make it 2. Time seemed to freeze. Every eye in the neighborhood was locked onto the scene. Onto Kiera, onto the biker, onto the small cup of lemonade that now trembled slightly in her hands. Kiera had no idea what was about to happen next, but she knew one thing for sure. This day had just taken a turn she never could have predicted. The street was still, so still that Kiera could hear the faint rustling of leaves in the warm summer breeze. Every eye in the neighborhood was on her, waiting, watching, as the towering biker took a slow step forward. His heavy boots pressed against the pavement, the sound echoing in the silence. Now that he was up close, Kiera could see the details of his jacket, worn black leather, lined with patches that looked important but meant nothing to her. His beard was thick and streaked with gray, framing a face that was rough yet somehow not unfriendly. His eyes, deep set and sharp, studied her lemonade stand for a moment before settling on her. Then, in a voice as deep and steady as rolling thunder, he spoke. "This is where I could get the best lemonade in town." Kiera's breath hitched. The words were casual, almost playful, but coming from him, they carried weight. A dozen thoughts rushed through her mind all at once. Was he joking? Was he serious? What if he hated the lemonade? What if? She shook the thoughts away, forcing herself to meet his gaze. Straightening her shoulders, she cleared her throat and did what her mother had always told her to do when she was nervous. She smiled. "Yes, sir," she said, her voice steadier than she expected. 50 cents a cup. For a split second, the silence stretched. Then, to Kiera's surprise, the biker chuckled. It wasn't a loud laugh, not the kind that boomed through a room, but rather a low, amused rumble, like the purring of an engine. He reached into the pocket of his jacket and pulled out a crumpled $1 bill, smoothing it between his calloused fingers. "Then make it 2, he said. Kiera's heart, which had been hammering moments before, began to slow. She had expected something else. She didn't know what exactly, but certainly not this. She took the dollar with careful hands, feeling the roughness of the worn paper between her fingers. Then, with a newfound confidence, she grabbed 2 paper cups and poured. The ice clinked gently against the sides, the golden liquid swirling under the summer sun. She handed the first cup to the biker, glancing up at him as he took it. He studied it for a moment, the condensation dripping down the side onto his gloved hand. Then, slowly, he lifted it to his lips. The entire street seemed to hold its breath. He took a long, deliberate sip, letting the cold lemonade linger before finally pulling the cup away. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he nodded. "Not bad, kid." Kiera exhaled, relief washing over her like a cool breeze. The tension that had filled the air moments ago melted, just a little. The other bikers watched silently as their leader took another sip, then held up the cup for them to see. "Best lemonade I've had in years." And just like that, everything changed. Kiera barely had time to process the biker's approval before another figure stepped forward. This one was different, a tall woman with long, dark braids cascading down her back. Her leather jacket bore a patch that read Sherry in stitched white letters. Unlike the gruff presence of the bearded man, she had a certain warmth in her expression, an amused glint in her eyes as she studied Kiera's stand. Without hesitation, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a crisp $5 bill, placing it firmly on the counter. "Go ahead and give me 10 cups for the crew," she said, her voice smooth and confident like someone used to giving orders. Kiera's mouth fell open. "Pay 10, she stammered, gripping her pitcher. Sherry grinned. "You heard me, sweetheart." Behind her, the other bikers started chuckling, their imposing presence suddenly seeming a little less intimidating. Kiera scrambled to grab more cups, pouring as quickly as she could while still trying to be careful. Her hands moved fast. Ice, lemonade, another cup, then another, her little stand suddenly bustling with activity. She wasn't just serving a couple of friendly neighbors anymore. She was serving an entire gang of bikers. Just as she set the last cup down in front of Sherry, another biker, this one a broad-shouldered man with a thick southern drawl, stepped forward, shaking his head in approval. "Kid, you got some talent," he said, reaching into his pocket and tossing a $20 bill onto the stand. "Here's for 2 cups. Keep the change." Kiera froze. $20? Her gaze flickered from the money to the biker, who just winked before grabbing his drink. The energy around the stand shifted. What had started as a tense, uncertain encounter had now transformed into something else entirely. Laughter rippled through the group as the bikers took their cups, sipping the lemonade and nodding in approval. A few leaned against their motorcycles, talking casually, while others exchanged jokes, their deep voices filling the air with an unexpected lightness. Kiera, who had been so nervous just minutes before, found herself smiling, really smiling. "So you made this all by yourself?" "Huh," one of them asked, swirling the lemonade in his cup. "Well, my mom helped," Kiera admitted, glancing toward the house where her mother still watched cautiously from the porch. "But it's my recipe." The biker let out a low whistle. "Now that's impressive. I reckon you might just have a future in business, little lady." Sherry, who had been sipping her drink with an appraising look, smacked her lips together and nodded. "Yep, I'd say this is some top-tier lemonade," she declared. "Might just have to make this our official gang drink." The group burst into laughter, and Kiera giggled along with them. A biker near the back leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees as he studied her. "So, what's the lemonade fund for anyway?" Kiera hesitated. For some reason, she hadn't expected them to ask. "I'm saving up for a class trip," she explained, glancing down at the coins and bills now piling up in her jar. "We're going to the Indianapolis Zoo." At once, the entire group reacted. "Ah, now that's a good cause," one said, nudging his friend. "Well, we can't just leave the kid hanging, can we?" Sherry added, tilting her head with a knowing smirk. Kiera blinked. What did that mean? She was about to find out. One of the younger bikers, who looked barely older than 20, crouched down to Kiera's level, his arms resting casually on his knees. His helmet dangled from one hand, and his leather jacket, though similar to the others, lacked the worn-out creases of time. There was a boyish curiosity in his eyes as he studied her. "So, what's all this for?" he asked, tilting his head toward the lemonade stand. "You trying to save up for something special?" Kiera hesitated for just a moment before answering. "I'm saving up for a school trip," she said, tucking a stray curl behind her ear. "We're going to the Indianapolis Zoo, but I need $50 to go." The young biker raised an eyebrow. $50, huh?" She nodded, then added, "I wanted to earn it myself." A strange silence settled over the group. Not uncomfortable, but thoughtful. A few of the bikers exchanged glances, some of them nodding as if they understood something Kiera didn't. Then, Sherry let out a dramatic sigh, shaking her head. "Well, now we can't just let you struggle for a school trip, can we?" she said, hands on her hips. Kiera blinked. "What?" Before she could even process what was happening, the younger biker lifted his helmet and, with a grin full of mischief, turned it upside down. "All right, folks," he announced, his voice carrying through the group. "You know what to do." One by one, the bikers reached into their pockets, pulling out crumpled bills, loose change, and even a few larger notes. The helmet made its way around the group, passing from one calloused hand to another, each biker dropping something inside. Kiera watched, her mouth slightly open, unable to believe what she was seeing. By the time the helmet made its way back to her, it was full, stuffed with dollar bills, 5s, 10s, and even a few 20s. The edges of the cash peeked over the rim, and the loose change at the bottom clinked softly as she took it in both hands, feeling its weight. Her eyes widened, her breath caught in her throat. She wasn't sure what she had expected. A few extra dollars, maybe, but this? She looked up at them, her small hands clutching the helmet. "Is this for me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Sherry smirked. "No, it's for the lemonade stand across the street," she teased before nudging Kiera's shoulder gently. "Of course it's for you, kid." Kiera's fingers trembled slightly as she peeked inside again. There had to be over $200 in there. 200. She had only needed 50. A sharp gasp slipped from her lips, and suddenly, her whole body was buzzing with excitement. "Thank you," she said, her voice genuine, raw, full of emotion. She looked from one biker to another, eyes shining, unable to hold back her sheer gratitude. "Thank you so much." One of the bikers, an older man with silver streaks in his beard, waved a hand dismissively. "Hard work deserves a little support, kid." Another grinned. "And besides, Now you can buy all the zoo souvenirs you want." A round of laughter followed, but Kiera hardly heard it. All she could feel was the warmth swelling in her chest, the overwhelming kindness of complete strangers who had just turned her small lemonade stand into something so much bigger than she ever imagined. As the laughter died down and the excitement settled, a stillness crept into the air. The bikers were still smiling, still chatting, but something had shifted. Kiera noticed it first. The way one of the men, a broad-shouldered biker with a faded eagle tattoo on his arm, had grown quiet. He hadn't spoken much before, but now he stood slightly apart from the group, his eyes fixed on something unseen in the distance. His expression was hard to read, but there was a weight in his gaze, something deep, something that didn't quite belong to the light-hearted moment they had just shared. Sherry seemed to notice too. She nudged him gently with her elbow. "Doug?" she asked, her voice softer now. "You good?" Doug didn't answer right away. Instead, he took a slow breath, his fingers absently rubbing over the ink on his forearm. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower, rougher, like gravel under a boot. "She reminds me of my daughter." The words hung in the air, cutting through the warmth of the afternoon like a sudden breeze. The bikers fell silent, their easy smiles fading as they turned to look at him. Kiera blinked, caught off guard. She wasn't sure what to say. Doug exhaled, shaking his head slightly as if trying to push away a memory. But when he looked at Kiera again, his expression was softer, distant, full of something she didn't quite understand. "My Mia used to run a little stand just like this," he said, his lips pressing into a faint, bittersweet smile. "She'd set up in front of our house every summer, mixing up lemonade and selling cookies to the neighbors. Always said she was saving up for something big. One year it was a trip, the next year a puppy." He chuckled, but it was a hollow sound, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. Kiera felt her heart squeeze in her chest. "What happened to her?" she asked quietly. Doug hesitated, and for a moment, Kiera thought he might not answer. But then, with a slow nod, he spoke again, his voice thick with emotion. "She passed away a few years ago," he said, barely above a whisper. "She was about your age." The world around them seemed to pause. The laughter that had filled the air just moments ago had completely faded, replaced by something else, something deeper, something heavier. Kiera didn't know what to say. She felt like anything that came out of her mouth wouldn't be enough. But as she looked at Doug, at the pain etched into the lines of his face, she understood. She didn't have the right words, so she did the only thing she could. She met his gaze, her eyes full of the unspoken kind of understanding that didn't need words. From the porch, her mother had been listening. Tasha took a small step forward, her voice gentle as she spoke. "I'm so sorry for your loss." Doug let out a breath, one that seemed to carry years of grief. He gave a small nod, swallowing hard before offering a faint, bittersweet smile. Helping this little one today, he looked back at Kiera, his eyes misty, his voice thick with something too deep to name. "Feels like helping her one more time." A hush fell over the group. The bikers, rough and tough as they were, lowered their heads slightly, giving Doug a quiet moment. Kiera, still holding the helmet full of money, looked down at it for a second. Then, without thinking, she reached inside, pulled out a $5 bill, and held it out to him. Doug blinked. "What's this?" "It's for Mia," Kiera said simply. His lips parted slightly, as if the words had caught him off guard. He stared at the bill in her small, outstretched hand, his fingers curling slightly at his sides. Then, slowly, he took it, pressing it tightly between his fingers. For a long moment, he just looked at it. Then he nodded, clearing his throat. "Thank you, kid." The moment held, warm and heavy, before the bearded biker from earlier suddenly clapped his hands together, breaking the silence. All right, he said with a gruff chuckle. "Let's not turn this into a cry fest. We've got more lemonade to drink." A wave of relieved laughter rolled through the group, the mood shifting again. But even as the moment passed, even as the laughter returned and the bikers went back to joking and teasing, Doug still stood there for a second longer, holding the $5 bill like it was something far more valuable than just money. And in that moment, Kiera realized something. This wasn't just about lemonade. It was about memories, about connection, about the unexpected ways people could help heal each other, even without meaning to. As the sun began its slow descent, casting long golden shadows across the quiet neighborhood, the bikers began to prepare for their departure. The once still street had transformed into a lively gathering place. Laughter and chatter filling the air in ways Kiera had never seen before. Doug gave Kiera one last nod, slipping the $5 bill into his pocket before turning to his crew. Sherry adjusted her leather jacket, taking one final sip of her lemonade before flashing a grin at the little girl behind the stand. "You've got a good thing going here, kid," she said. "Would be a shame if people didn't hear about it." Kiera blinked. "What do you mean?" The bearded biker chuckled as he swung his leg over his motorcycle. "We mean we're going to spread the word." Kiera's mouth fell open. The sound of engines roaring to life sent a shiver of excitement through her. The bikers, once an intimidating sight, now felt like unexpected friends. They revved their bikes in unison, sending vibrations through the pavement as they waved their goodbyes. "Take care, Kiera," one of them called out. "We'll be back for more," another added. With a final roar, they rode off, their silhouettes disappearing around the corner, leaving behind a stunned silence. For a moment, Kiera just stood there, watching the spot where they had vanished. The street felt oddly empty without them, except it wouldn't stay that way for long, because within minutes, something incredible happened. It started with a single car slowing down, then another, and then, just like that, people began arriving in droves. Word had spread fast, faster than Kiera thought possible. Neighbors who had been peeking from behind curtains now stepped outside, curious about the unexpected visitors who had rolled into their peaceful suburb. A group of kids from down the block ran up, skidding to a stop in front of her stand. "Did we just see a whole biker gang here?" one of them asked, eyes wide with excitement. Kiera, still trying to process everything, managed a small smile. "Yeah, they bought a lot of lemonade." The kids gawked at the helmet still overflowing with cash, and before Kiera could say anything else, more people started arriving. The most unexpected guest of all was Mr. Harris, the owner of the local grocery store, a man who rarely left his shop during business hours. He stepped up to the stand, his sharp eyes twinkling with curiosity. "I heard a rumor," he said, crossing his arms. "Something about biker-approved lemonade?" Kiera giggled. "I guess so." Mr. Harris let out a thoughtful hum. "Well, if it's good enough for them, it's good enough for me." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a $5 bill. "I'll take 3 cups." From there, the line only grew. Parents arrived with their children, elderly neighbors came out to see what the fuss was about, and soon enough, her little lemonade stand was surrounded by a bustling crowd. Kids grabbed markers and cardboard to make signs, holding them up on the street corner to wave at passing cars. "Best lemonade in town," one of them shouted. "Official biker lemonade," another chimed in. It was no longer just a lemonade stand. It was an event. As Kiera worked tirelessly, pouring lemonade as fast as her hands could move, she caught sight of her mother standing on the porch, watching it all unfold. Tasha met her daughter's gaze and shook her head in pure amazement. "Baby," she called over the noise, "I think you just started something big." Kiera, her heart swelling with joy, could only grin. She had set out to earn $50, but somehow she had earned something far greater. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, painting the neighborhood in soft hues of gold and amber, Kiera's lemonade stand was still buzzing with life. The once quiet street had transformed into a lively hub of laughter, conversation, and the sweet scent of fresh lemonade. Kiera barely had a moment to catch her breath. With her best friend Mia by her side, they poured cup after cup, hands sticky with sugar and lemon juice, but neither of them minded. This was bigger than anything Kiera had ever imagined. She had set out to make $50. Now, she had made more than 4 times that amount. Just as she was about to take a small break, a familiar voice rang out from the crowd. All right. Now this is what I like to see." Kiera looked up to see Carlos, the owner of the local hardware store, strolling toward the stand. He was a big man, always dressed in overalls and a dusty cap, with a voice that could command an entire room. "Lemonade, community, and a whole lot of folks coming together," he said, crossing his arms with a satisfied nod. Now, that's the kind of thing this town needs more of. A few people nearby murmured in agreement. Kiera tilted her head, curious as to where this was going. Carlos stroked his beard thoughtfully, glancing around at the crowd, then at Kiera's stand. You know, he mused, this doesn't have to be just a one-time thing. Kiera blinked. What do you mean? Carlos turned to the crowd. What if we made this a tradition? A monthly lemonade day, where kids set up stands like this all over town. We could raise money for school trips, supplies, and kids who need a little extra help. The reaction was immediate. People perked up, excited murmurs spread through the crowd, and before Kiera could even wrap her head around the idea, a voice called out, "That's genius." "Yeah, let's do it," someone else chimed in. A wave of cheers and applause rippled through the gathering. Parents, kids, shop owners, everyone was nodding along, voices overlapping in excitement. Kiera's heart raced. She had never imagined something like this. She had just wanted to go to the zoo. But now, standing in front of a crowd full of smiling faces, she realized this had become so much bigger than her own dream. Carlos turned back to her, a knowing smile on his face. "So, what do you say, Kiera? You up for leading the charge?" For a moment, she just stared at him, overwhelmed. Then, slowly, a grin spread across her face. "I think that sounds amazing." The crowd erupted into cheers once more, and in that moment, Kiera knew this was only the beginning. That evening, as the last of the lemonade cups were stacked away and the street finally returned to its usual quiet hum, Kiera sat on the front steps of her house, exhausted but exhilarated. The warm summer air wrapped around her like a comforting blanket, the scent of freshly cut grass lingering in the breeze. Beside her, the helmet full of money rested on the porch. Bills and coins overflowed, far more than she had ever dreamed of earning in a single day. She had counted earlier. She had made over $250, more than enough for the zoo trip, more than enough for anything she had imagined. Her mother, Tasha, stepped out of the house with 2 glasses of lemonade, the last of the batch they had made together that morning. She handed one to Kiera before settling beside her, their shoulders touching as they both took a sip. For a moment, they just sat there, watching the world slow down around them. The sounds of distant crickets filled the air, and overhead, the first stars of the evening began to appear. Tasha finally broke the silence, glancing down at the pile of money next to her daughter. "Well, baby," she said, her voice full of pride, "I think you just made more in one day than most lemonade stands do in a month." Kiera let out a soft laugh, shaking her head. "I still can't believe it happened." She glanced at the helmet again, fingers running over the folded bills. "I only needed $50. Tasha smiled knowingly. "Funny how things work out, huh?" Kiera took another sip of her lemonade, thoughtful now. The money was exciting, sure. But when she thought back to the day, the laughter, the kindness of the bikers, the way the entire neighborhood had come together, it wasn't the money that made her happiest. It was the connections. It was the way people had shown up for her. How they had turned a simple lemonade stand into something so much bigger. She looked up at her mom, a decision forming in her heart. "Mom, do you think we could donate some of this?" Tasha's eyebrows lifted in surprise. "Donate?" Kiera nodded, sitting up straighter. "I mean, I have more than enough for the zoo trip. But there are other kids who probably don't, right? Maybe we could give some of this to help them go on field trips too. Or buy school supplies. Or," she hesitated, then smiled softly, "maybe even donate something in Mia's name." For a moment, Tasha didn't say anything. She just looked at her daughter, her eyes shining with something deeper than pride. Then, she reached over and tucked a curl behind Kiera's ear, her smile full of warmth. "You've learned the biggest lesson about kindness, sweetheart," she said gently. "When you give, you always get back more than you ever expected." Kiera felt that truth settle deep inside her. She leaned back on her elbows, tilting her head toward the sky. The stars were brighter now, scattered across the endless blue like tiny flecks of silver. She had started the day with a simple goal, $50 for a field trip. But somehow, she had ended up with something far greater. A community brought together. new friendships she never expected, and the knowledge that sometimes when you put a little good into the world gives back in ways you never see coming. If this story made you think, don't just scroll away. Take action, like this video, to help spread awareness. Share it with your friends and family, because conversations spark change. Comment below and tell us your thoughts. Have you ever witnessed an abuse of power? Let's talk about it. Follow our channel for more powerful real-life stories. And turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Change starts with awareness. Awareness starts with you. Be part of the movement.